Well, good morning on another rainy morning here in Birmingham. Quite dismal weather, really, to look out of the window. But it's fairly warm in the house, so that's fine. And yesterday I went to the annual end of year get together of the Truth Society in my local chapter of the Truth Society, which I've attended now for on and off really, but for a long time. I think um, I'm not sure that I was even a Christian when I first went there. I'm not sure. I can't recall. So it would be, around about 12 years that I've known these people and variously disagreed with them, but also agreed initially and sometimes still do agree uh, with some of their, concerns and perspectives. And so last night I had the chance to talk to people that I hadn't talked to at all. And of course, you know, the Bible was brought into question continually. And I found myself, well, kind of almost evangelizing or, explaining my beliefs as I sometimes will do. And they're challenged, you see. These are people who will definitely challenge. Um, and they're just challenges that I hear so much that I can hardly be bothered with them these days, but they're the same old ones, more or less. It was the first time that I'd been challenged over hell. Somebody was telling me that, because God had made Satan and then created hell and eternal torment was all deliberately created by God, and he wasn't going to worship, an almighty being that did such horrible stuff. I think I've heard that argument before. And it's a tiresome argument, really. It's a very dangerous argument also, because it's self-defeating in a measure, because it's the pot arguing with the potter, isn't it? Um, but it starts from the presumption that the speaker is worth anything at all. That's the problem that people have. The thing that I found most difficult to explain, especially in the truth movement, well, anywhere really, is just how worthless and wretched we are. So many times I have to correct people on this. I do. There's a centenarian in the church, a nice old lady, very pleasant and quite knowledgeable comparatively of the Bible because of her age. I'm sure she grew up at a time when the Bible was more respected. And she said to me yesterday, she said, there are many good people in this church. There are some good people in this church, looking around the room. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, there really aren't. There really aren't. And the Bible tells us that there aren't. What are you saying? Why do I always have to make that correction? And the gentleman, of course, that was speaking suffered from this defect. He thought he was worth something, and he didn't realize that he was wretched and naked before the Almighty God. And sure enough, chatting to him, and this a very interesting man and clever, I would say, somewhat. But the problem with cleverness is, how clever are you really? It's a dangerous conceit to think that you're brainy. It's one of the worst things for a translator, I discovered after a while, because it can entice you into great error. And the best way to approach a hard translation is in a childlike and open manner, so that you don't impose any or too many preconceptions that could lead you astray. Oh, I've seen many clever translators go right off the rails because of that conceit. And I'm certainly done it myself. It's a dangerous position. But, so if your level of culture is higher, I suppose, or quite relatively high compared to your peers, then you might be lulled into the idea that you're a bit clever. And, why not? I mean, people are of different intellectual abilities. My uncle, Sylvester, who had married my mother's sister and lived near my house, they lived together. He was a very simple-minded man indeed. I think he was scarcely literate. He was an Irishman, and he was a farm labourer. And my father stayed with him and my auntie for a few weeks when he was made redundant, and he was seeking work and having interviews in Birmingham, where he eventually came to work in a paint factory. And he stayed with my aunt and uncle for a while. Well, my father was, quite a posh sort of gentleman, I suppose you could say. He knew how to be posh. He had good vocabulary. He was, I suppose, quite a highly educated man because of his letters, being a fellow of the Royal Institute of Chemistry and what have you, or the Royal Society of, I don't know what he was, but some sort of letters, some sort of credentials that he'd been given. Whereas my uncle was just very, very simple-minded man indeed, and not given to conversation particularly, or not. He'd just make some comments. He was a bit of a ladies' man, I discovered later. I think a little bit too much of a ladies' man sometimes, but, well, who am I to say? And he was a farm labourer. He was extremely strong. He had great cords of muscle running through his arms and his neck, and a very short, stocky build. A very, very broad Irish accent that's hardly understandable many times to me. And he would sit right beside the television set, touching it, and bend his head round and glare at it, and drink his tea from the saucer, pouring it into the saucer and drinking it, slurping it noisily. That's how he drank it. He was a character, and I just imagine my father sitting in the living room with them, and what kind of conversation could have possibly occurred? My father wasn't the best. He wasn't a very good. I don't know. He liked to underline his superiority in terms of intellectual stature, I think, or what he's perceived to be that. He wasn't a tremendously nice fellow in that respect, but what can you say, I shouldn't think the conversation went on for too long. So, yeah, we have different levels of intellectual ability, and we just have to understand that. There's nothing wrong with it at all. And it's very easy to overestimate, your understanding of a certain thing. And, flattery can be a sign that there's some, again, it's another trap. You're trapped by your idea of who you are. You form an opinion of yourself, and it might not even appear on the surface to be a flattering opinion. But then that traps you into having to live up to that standard or whatever it is. And it transpired that this gentleman was an actor, was an amateur actor, and had been doing it for many, many years, so he was quite devoted to it. Well, of course, acting is a very dangerous activity for anybody. Not therefore wicked or evil or anything like that. Simply, I'm saying it is dangerous because it entices us to play roles at the behest of another, and to perhaps distract our attention from the fact that we are playing roles, and we can play roles at the behest of the Lord Jesus Christ. We play roles in our society because we walk on a stage. We all do it. And sure enough, a few minutes later, he was reciting some verses from a play. He said that he was very keen on the poetic expression of the writer, and he'd learned quite a longish part, and he recited it very well, and it was certainly powerful and emotional language, and he gave me a short rendition to show how much, well, I suppose how well he read it, and the fact that he had learned it, he was proud of it. Well, why not, you see? But that's the problem with that stuff, is that it traps you. You have to know what you're doing, rather than slipping it in unconsciously, because then it's controlling you. Nothing wrong with a bit of vanity. I mean, it's hardly something that I'm alien to. But it's a weapon in your arsenal, as it were, rather than to be trapped by it. And so he challenged the authority of Jesus Christ, and as just a very common atheistic position. And he did it quite, eruditely, I think, and he's thought about the matter. But missing just the fundamental problem that he's unworthy, and he's speaking of the King, and how dare he do that? That's the problem. People think they're something. We think we're somebody. But when you're kneeling in the very pit of death and you're facing the Creator, who are you? You're dust. You're stood up dust, walking around. That's what you are. But through Jesus Christ, you can live. Oh, I had some very interesting conversations, and fielded some not tricky questions, but I had to think about stuff, I guess, and I defended my faith, as I always do. Told people to read that it's the King James Bible that is the Bible. Because, of course, I was greeted with all the many, it's been changed, and the different translations. Well, I do pull rank a little bit on that, I have to say. And I know it's not an argument to just point out that I have been a translator for, more than 30 years. It's been my profession all of my life. So I looked into this matter really carefully. It's something I do know something about, by profession, I guess. But, people will always persist with their sly talking, and they'll often say that King James was a homosexual, as though this had anything to do with anything, and whether it be true or false, I have no idea, no interest in the matter whatsoever. And all this sort of stuff. So all that has to be answered. And then I spoke to another fellow who was, he was quite supportive when I said that he asked me what I believed, and I said that I believed the Bible, and he agreed with me. And then he went on to explain that he'd now come to realize that the Bible was was limited in scope. I had to drink something there. And he was going down the Kundalini path with it. He was he was going down the Gnostic route. He still thought that it was a limitation, and that the true force lay within a man, and that's what needed to be celebrated and brought out, as it were. So he was full on Gnosticism, and I know loads about that because I've heard so much about it. And he just proceeded to say wrong thing after wrong thing, and I must admit, I tried to protest at certain statements, but he held up his hand and made it quite clear that he was going to say his fill and not be interrupted. And so I shut up after that, and I let him rage. And I've heard those arguments so often. Firstly from Eric Dubay, when I got into flat earth stuff and was disappointed to hear them spewing from his mouth such nonsense, really. I have so little time for all that Kundalini stuff and the number of vertebrae. To me, it seems that it's all part of the striving for knowledge that, if it's given to us, if we need it, it will be given to us. But I think this is in the realm of God. How our spirit is constructed, but they're obsessed with it because they try to imitate it. They love to imitate it because they try to elevate themselves. And they resent what they see as an unjust yoke being placed upon them. It's quite clear. And I asked the fellow after he'd finished, I said, well, have you read the Bible? And he said, yes, I've read the Bible. Well, I didn't challenge him straight away, but I certainly could do, because people say that. But, if I ask them, well, what do you think of Nahum, for example? They wouldn't know what I was talking about. If I ask them where you can find the Psalms in the Bible, they probably won't know. Any sort of, you can ask somebody, well, it wouldn't take a lot, would it, to upset somebody who's probably read maybe the Gospels, maybe a couple of chapters from the Old Testament. I don't know. I mean, maybe the person really has read the entire Bible, but I just doubt it somehow. It's quite a thing to read the entire Bible. You've got to read Chronicles as well. And really, you should read the first part of the first 10 chapters of the First Chronicles, which are just really long lists of names. But I think, I've always thought that you could probably skip that and still claim to have read the Bible, or skim it a little bit in certain places, you could say, But I just don't believe people, I'm afraid, when they say I've read the Bible and then go on to tell me about, the Kundalini effect or whatever, or the chakras. Of course, the chakras were sure to come into the conversation before long. So he was quite aggressive with his position, and made it quite clear that he he'd reached this conclusion and that was it. You know, he'd been brought up in a religious household, and he complimented his parents, I think, for having supported, you know, for having done works, good works in restoring a church, or paying for restoration of a church. So he was contaminated with this mindset, this wicked mindset of works salvation. And then he'd rejected something which he didn't understand, and he'd formed a new position into which he had cemented his beliefs. But the problem is that people just assume that they understand more than they do. You know, you need to take a critical look at yourself in the mirror and just say, look, you know, how much do I really understand this stuff? Could I be wrong about it? This is why I tried to explain this at a certain point. If you walk with Christ, then you have a witness. You have a witness in the Holy Bible. So your action and your opinion and your perception must find a biblical support, and will find biblical support if it's godly. And so, you know, you need two witnesses to establish a matter. Whereas with the New Age people, they don't have a witness. They just have the word of man and a feeling. God bless this morning.